Cool. So now let's talk a little bit about immunity and microbiology. So the types of pathogens that you'll mainly need to know are bacteria and viruses, full stop. I added prions in there just for fun. There's like a famous disease called mad cow's disease, or I don't know how to pronounce the other name, but it's like I think is it German or something? But essentially there's something called mad cow disease, and just for fun, mad cow disease is it was from cow meat, that's why it's called mad cow, and it caused these cows to behave really abnormally. And the people would eat the meat of these cows, right, as you do, and then they would also eat these prions. And prions are basically just misfolded proteins which wreak havoc. So once this prion meets another protein, it causes it to be folded in the same way. So it's kind of like infecting other proteins. But we really need proteins in all of our bodies. So once it affects multiple things, it affected primarily the things in the brain. And because all of the proteins were changing to this random prion, which doesn't do anything, it was disrupting all the function in the brain, and people unfortunately passed away from that. But it is a really interesting disease. Like most diseases are quite interesting and quite unique. The main two you'll need to know are bacteria and viruses because they're common, there's a lot of them, right? So bacteria, they're prokaryotic organisms, which can be commensal, which means it helps the human body, is ready in the human body, or can be disease causing and can secrete toxins and invade tissues. Viruses, on the other hand, cannot live without a host, so it's not alive, right? And it just goes through this cycle of it binds, it duplicates, the uses the nucleus to form its own proteins, and then it duplicates, and then it forms little vesicles, and then buds out and explodes the cell, and does lots of wonderful things that way. Some viruses live within cells their entire life. Some viruses just like escape into the wild, into the bloodstream. Other things that you might come across are called protozoa, which are eukaryotic organisms. They're things like worms and that type of organism. Um, there's also fungi, so fungi can also cause problems. Yeah, so like the mold you see growing can cause quite nasty disease, especially in people who don't have great immune systems. Okay. So, in terms of lines of defense of immunity, we'll talk about a couple of things. So, the biggest line of defense for your body is you're going to be your skin, your beautiful intact skin. Okay, if it's not intact, it's no longer a line of defense, and it prevents pathogens from physically getting on there. And also, there's a lot of like things on the skin as well, like enzymes and acids and stuff, which actually are not great for growth of bacteria. So that's why it's really good. Another thing that's really important in the lungs is the mucociliary elevator. So the mucociliary elevator is essentially like the cilia are little like hairs in your like in your breathing tubes, and they kind of like beat. And then you have mucus, which is like sticky stuff. So if you think of it, a bug sticks to the mucus and then it gets beaten out. It's kind of like a vacuuming system, not vacuuming, more like a what's called a sweeping system, right? Like it sweeps all that gross stuff outside. So then once you cough it up, you can either swallow it down or you can just get it out of your body, right? And if you swallow it down, the stomach is pretty good at like killing things. So it's very acidic. So once it gets down there, the bug will probably die, but which is good for us, right? Because we don't want bugs in our body. In some diseases, this can be quite impaired. So there's a disease called cystic fibrosis, which affects the lungs and it can affect a lot of other body parts as well. And what happens in that one is the mucus and that just becomes so thick that the cilia, because they're little things, they do not have enough energy to beat things out. So it just stays there, festers, gets even worse, and causes really bad problems. Cool. The next one we'll talk about is this beautiful stomach here, which which I said just then about how acidic it is. So because it's so acidic, it's really good at killing most bacteria. But there is some bacteria which live here quite well, uh, including something called H. pylori or Helicobacter pylori, and that's a really famous bacteria because what so fun fact about this bacteria, the person who discovered it gave himself an infection with it and then tried to treat it to prove that it was causing him his stomach problems. But essentially, it's this type of bacteria, and what it does is it kind of neutralizes that acidic environment so that it can live with it. So it still cannot deal with the acidic environment, but it has mechanisms to kind of help it become less acidic. And then in crying and saliva, there's enzymes which break things down, really good at breaking down proteins and that type of thing. So whenever, if you ever cry and then somebody's like, "Is everything okay?" You can be like, "No, I'm just killing all the bacteria on my face, and that's why I'm crying." So it's, it's a good way to get an excuse for it. Another good thing is our lovely back like gut and lovely skin and lovely everything bacteria. There's a lot of great bacteria which help us be more healthy. So whenever we get an infection or anything like that, often the bacteria which are there already kind of fight for space and say, "Nope, you can't grow here. We're already using all the resources." Another really good thing about these is that it helps you, like they might secrete stuff as well, which make the environment not very welcome to other things trying to grow into it. So that's really good. But on the flip side, if our body has too much of these, they can also cause problems in the long term. And whenever we like have antibiotics, we basically kill off all of our healthy bacteria, or at least a good portion of it. So that's a bit unfortunate. So the last type of thing is in terms of our hair, we have a lot of oils and sebum and lovely stuff which kind of protect from bacterial growth, right? So yeah. And then we also have, so with this one we coughed up, and this one in the urinary tract we kind of just get it out, right? Just goes flip flop and out of our body. So in terms of the lower half, we always try to expel things out as well. That's why if you get a tummy infection, your diarrhea is good because that means you're expelling the bad stuff out. Okay, in terms of the second line of defense, the second line of defense is non-specific. So essentially, what it does is it sees anything which doesn't look like itself and it's like, nope, you out of here. So what it does is the main function of a lot of these is being a phagocyte. So a phagocyte, phago is like eat, cyte is like cell, so eating cell. So that's exactly what it does. It just eats other cells, and then what it does is it like engulfs another cell and then puts lysosomes, which are like enzymes and toxic things, into the cell and kind of breaks it apart, right? And then once it breaks it apart, it can like spit it out into the bloodstream to kind of get rid of it because now it's just broken parts. The Some of these are a little bit different. So these are mainly involved in like allergic reactions or reactions. These two, so the monocyte and the neutrophil, these are the major phagocytes. Microcyte is a little bit better at connecting us to the next line of defense as well. Neutrophils not so much. They're really sad cells because they're like the first line of they're like the first on the scene and the first to die. Like they get there, they eat stuff, then they expire. It's really sad. So all of the pus you see is actually made of neutrophils, which is really tragic because they fight really hard. And then we'll have lymphocytes as well, which are part of the third line of defense, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But there's also factors like complement factors, and there's cytokines, which also are really important for our second line of defense as well. Cool. So in terms of our third line of defense, we have the B response and the T response, right? So the T response is focused normally on things which are intracellular. So if we have bugs inside cells, that's what the cytotoxic and kind of T cell response focuses on, compared to the humoral response, or the things that involve the B cells. That more focuses on things which are extracellular, things that we can attach to, right? So what happens is we have an antigen presenting cell, like a macrophage or dendritic cell, and those are just two different types of cells. And essentially what it does is it's just like it goes to its leader and it's like, "I'm showing you, here you go, look at what I found," right? And then the thing that finds it will be like, "Oh, that's not good." So then they'll try and recruit people which can fight this thing. So it will recruit people, and then once it finds the correct recruit, it will like duplicate them so that we have a larger working force. This applies for both the humoral and the cytotoxic response, so the T and the C response. The difference is that the T cells, what they basically do is they're like armed killers. So they attach to the cell, they inject poison, inject things which melt off their bones, and then they inject that together, the cell dies, or the thing inside the cell dies, and then it kind of scraps it away. It's the type of cell which kills the cell in order to kill the thing inside it as well. So it burns down the building in order to like get the person inside of it. Compared to that, the B cell is it produces these things called antibodies, which are these little things that we see here. And essentially, what it does is it pumps those out, those attach to cells, and kind of say, here, here, to the neutrophils and the phagocytes from before, like, here, come and eat me, I am here. And then kind of flags it to the system, right? And then you'll have something called memory B and memory T cells. What they do is that's the whole idea behind vaccinations, because what's happening is we once you get vaccinated, the bug's antigen kind of gets introduced to you, and you're like, okay, I know where that is. So the idea of that is that if we have these memory cells around, the system doesn't need to go through that whole process of again of trying to find that cell. It now has a large variety of that cell, so it can directly like make it it's more easier to mount an immune response after